I've lived through a lot in my 62 years, but nothing prepared me for this. The emergency alert came through at 7:43 a.m. while I was fixing Talia's breakfast. Same scrambled eggs I'd been making her for 3 years now, ever since the accident left her needing more help getting around. The phone screamed that awful noise they use for tornado warnings, except this wasn't about weather. Emergency alert. Necrotic virus turned airborne over cities. Avoid populated areas. Seek immediate shelter. Dad, what's that about? Talia called from the kitchen table, her voice tight with worry. She'd been jumpy since her injury. Loud noises, sudden changes. They all hit her harder now. Probably some kind of chemical spill, I said, but my gut was already telling me different. I'd seen government alerts before. They don't use words like necrotic unless something's eating people alive. The TV was showing the test pattern. Radio stations were either silent or playing automated messages. That's when I knew we were in real trouble. I walked to the window and looked out at Pine Ridge's main street. Mrs. Harris was watering her flowers like always. The Hendersons' dog was barking at nothing in particular. Everything looked normal, but the emergency broadcast was still cycling through that message every 30 seconds. Dad, maybe we should drive into town and see what's happening? No. The word came out harder than I meant it. We stay put until we know more. I'd raised 2 kids after their mother died, worked construction for 40 years before my back gave out, survived a heart attack and 3 rounds of chemo. You learn to read situations. You learn when normal isn't normal anymore. I started moving through the house, checking locks, closing blinds. Old habits from the years after Sarah died, when I was paranoid about everything and everyone. Talia watched me with that careful expression she got when she was worried about my state of mind. Dad, you're scaring me. Good. Scared keeps you thinking. The landline rang around 10 a.m. I answered it carefully. Silas? It's Arden Vale from the fire station. Arden's voice was tight, professional. You getting the emergency broadcasts? Yeah. What do you know? Not much. Lost contact with county dispatch around 8 this morning. State police aren't responding to radio calls. But I've got reports of incidents in Millbrook. Millbrook was 20 miles east of us, population maybe 3,000. Close enough to matter. What kind of incidents? Long pause. People attacking other people. Biting. And the people who get bit, they change. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Change how? They die, Silas. Then they get back up. I looked out the window again. Mrs. Harris was still watering her flowers, but now I noticed she was wearing the same yellow dress she'd worn yesterday. Same exact position, same mechanical movements. Arden, how long you been watching the Harris place? Why? Just answer me. I don't know, maybe an hour? She's been watering those same flowers the whole time. Must be flooding by now. I hung up and grabbed my binoculars. Through the lenses, I could see Mrs. Harris clearly. She was standing in water up to her ankles, still pouring from an empty watering can. Her movements were wrong, too regular, too mechanical. And there was something dark staining the front of her yellow dress. Dad, Talia's voice came from behind me. What are you looking at? Stay away from the windows, I said, pulling the blinds shut. We need to talk. I sat down across from her at the kitchen table and tried to figure out how to explain that the world was ending. The emergency alert, the radio silence, what Arden just told me. I think something really bad is happening. Something that started in the cities and is spreading out here. What kind of something? I thought about how to put it without sending her into a panic. Some kind of disease that makes people violent. Turns them into something that isn't quite human anymore. Talia was quiet for a long moment, processing. She'd always been the smart one in the family. Full scholarship to college before the accident changed everything. Like rabies? Maybe, but faster and worse. And you think Mrs. Harris? I think Mrs. Harris died sometime last night or this morning, and whatever's left of her is still going through the motions. The first real sign came around noon. Jude Lane's pickup truck came tearing down Elm Street going at least 60, which was impossible because Jude never drove faster than the speed limit. The truck swerved into the Matthews fence and just sat there, engine running, driver's door hanging open. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the truck. Jude was slumped over the steering wheel, but I could see him moving. Jerky movements, like he was having some kind of seizure. Dad, is that Mr. Lane? Should we go help him? Not yet, I said, watching Jude's movements get more violent. Something dark was spreading across his shirt. Not yet. When Jude finally got out of the truck, he moved wrong. Too stiff, like his joints weren't bending right, and he was bleeding from his mouth, a steady stream that didn't seem to bother him at all. He started walking toward the Matthews house with that same jerky, mechanical gait. When Sarah Matthews opened her door to check on him, I saw him grab her arm. Heard her scream all the way from our place. That scream cut off too sudden. "We're barricading the doors," I said, standing up. "Right now." "Dad, maybe we should call the police." "Police aren't answering." I was already pushing the kitchen table toward the back door. "Help me with this." For the next 2 hours, we turned our house into a fortress. Heavy furniture against all the doors, boards nailed over the first-floor windows, every entrance blocked except for one basement window I could use as an escape route if necessary. Talia worked without complaining, even though I could see the exertion was wearing on her. Her left leg, the one that never healed right, was starting to drag. "Dad, what if help comes and they can't get in? Then they'll announce themselves and we'll let them in. But we're not opening these doors for anyone we can't verify." By evening, we could hear screaming from different parts of town. Not the kind of screaming you get from accidents or fights. The kind that goes on too long, then stops too sudden. The kind that means whoever was doing the screaming isn't going to be screaming anymore. I'd set up a watch station in the basement where I could see out through a gap in the window boards. Around sunset, I saw the Matthews front door open. Sarah Matthews walked out, except it wasn't Sarah anymore. She moved with that same mechanical gait, her clothes torn and bloodied. Behind her came what had been her husband Tom, then their teenage daughter. All of them walking in the same jerky rhythm, all of them heading toward different houses where lights were still on. "Dad, what are we going to do?" I looked at my daughter, sitting on the air mattress I'd set up in the basement, surrounded by the emergency supplies I'd been hoarding since my cancer scare 5 years ago. 3 cases of water, maybe 20 cans of food, my old hunting rifle, and 2 boxes of ammunition. We wait. We stay quiet. We stay alive. For how long? That was the question I didn't want to answer. In my gut, I already knew this wasn't the kind of problem that got solved in a few days. This was the kind of problem that changed everything forever, as long as it takes. But that night, lying awake listening to the sounds from outside, footsteps on pavement breaking glass, things that might have been voices calling names, I started to understand that as long as it takes might be longer than we could survive. The power went out on day 2. Water stopped running on day 3. By day 4, Pine Ridge sounded like a war zone. I'd moved all our supplies into the basement, along with everything else we might need, extra clothes, medications, the battery-powered radio, candles, matches. The rifle stayed within arm's reach at all times. "Tell me again why we can't just drive to the city," Talia said, repositioning herself on the air mattress. Her left leg was bothering her more than usual. Stress made the old injury flare up. "Because the city's where this started." I was reinforcing the basement windows with boards I'd torn from the back fence. Radio said the virus went airborne over populated areas first. Cities are death traps now. The radio still worked when we could pick up signals. Most stations were off the air, but we'd caught fragments of emergency broadcasts. Military units overwhelmed. Major cities under quarantine. Something about necrotizing pathogen with unknown transmission vectors. Government talk for, we don't know how it spreads and we can't stop it. Through the small basement window, I could see smoke rising from what used to be the Hendersons' place. Something had been pounding on our upstairs doors for the past hour, slow, rhythmic, patient. Too patient for any living human. What if help comes and we're hiding down here? Help's not coming, sweetheart. I hated being this blunt with her, but sugarcoating reality gets people killed. Government's got bigger problems than a town of 800 people. She was quiet for a while, staring at the ceiling. Then, how many people do you think are left? I'd been wondering the same thing. On day 1, I'd counted maybe 30 houses with lights on after dark. Day 2, it was closer to 20. Last night, I'd seen maybe 6. Not many. Are we going to die here, Dad? I stopped hammering and looked at her. 25 years old, brilliant, brave, and asking me the question I'd been asking myself since this started. Not if I can help it. The pounding upstairs stopped. In the silence, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Talia's name being called from outside. "Talia. Talia, honey." It was my neighbor, Mira Frost. Except Myra's voice had never sounded like that before, all raspy and wet, like she was talking through blood. Talia started to respond, and I clamped my hand over her mouth. Shook my head hard. "Talia, sweetie, your daddy's hurt. Come help me." The voice was getting closer to the basement window. I could hear feet shuffling through the dead leaves in our yard, that same mechanical movement I'd been watching for 4 days now. I grabbed the rifle and positioned myself where I could see the window. Whatever had been Mira Frost appeared in the frame, pressing its face against the glass. The skin was gray-green, hanging loose in places. One eye was completely white. The other was tracking back and forth, searching. But it was still wearing Myra's favorite blue sweater, and it still knew Talia's name. "Dad," Talia whispered against my hand. "Is that Mrs. Frost?" "Used to be." The thing that had been Mira started clawing at the window glass, leaving bloody smears. Its movements got more agitated when it couldn't get through. But it kept calling Talia's name over and over in that horrible parody of human speech. After about 10 minutes, it wandered off. I could hear it moving around the house, trying different windows, still calling. Are they all going to turn into that? I thought about the emergency alert. Necrotic virus, airborne transmission. I thought about how quickly this had spread, how even people who seemed fine one day were shambling monsters the next. Anyone who breathes it in, probably. Anyone who gets bit or scratched for sure. What about us? Why haven't we gotten sick? That was the question that had been keeping me up at night. We'd been in the house since before the first cases appeared in town. Maybe we'd avoided the initial airborne exposure. Maybe some people were naturally immune. Maybe we just hadn't been exposed yet. Don't know. But we're not taking chances. I'd sealed every crack and gap in the basement with duct tape, just in case. We were breathing recycled air, eating canned food, drinking bottled water. Living like we were in a submarine, waiting for the all-clear signal. Except the all-clear signal wasn't coming. That night, while Talia slept, I counted our supplies again. Food for maybe 8 more days if we were careful. Water for 5 days, 6 if we rationed strictly. Ammunition for 1 serious fight, if it came to that. I'd survived a lot of things by being practical, by not panicking, by making hard choices when they needed making. But this was different. This wasn't about enduring until things got better. Things weren't getting better. They were getting worse, and they were going to keep getting worse until there was nothing left to get worse. On day 5, I heard vehicles. Not the random crashes and engine noises we'd been hearing as infected people drove cars until they wrecked them. This was organized, multiple engines, coordinated movement, the sound of an actual convoy. I climbed up to peek through the boards over the kitchen window. 3 military vehicles were moving slowly down Main Street, dodging abandoned cars and bodies. Soldiers in full hazmat gear were walking alongside, checking each house. "Dad, is that the army?" Talia had followed me upstairs despite my orders to stay in the basement. "Looks like it. Thank God. They're here to help us." But I'd lived long enough to know that military vehicles in your neighborhood during a crisis could mean rescue or cleanup, and there wasn't always a difference between the two. I watched them work. They'd go into a house, spend 5 or 10 minutes inside, then come out with body bags or nothing at all. No survivors. Not a single person being evacuated or rescued. When they reached the Morrison place 3 houses down, I heard gunshots from inside. Multiple shots, more than you'd need to put down 1 infected person. When the soldiers came out, they were carrying 3 body bags. "Dad, why are they shooting people?" Maybe they're putting the infected out of their misery. Or maybe they're making sure nobody's left alive to spread the infection. The convoy moved on to the next house. Same routine. Soldiers go in, shots fired, body bags come out. They were being thorough, professional, systematic. They were cleaning up. "Dad, when they get to our house, we stay hidden. Let them think the house is empty. But they could help us. They could get us somewhere safe." I watched the soldiers load another set of body bags into their truck. They weren't checking for signs of life. They weren't trying to communicate with potential survivors. They were eliminating a contamination risk. "Sweetheart, I don't think they're distinguishing between infected and uninfected anymore." The convoy was 2 houses away now. I could hear them talking to each other through their radio headsets, coordinating their sweep pattern. Basement. Now. We crept back downstairs and waited in the dark, listening to the sound of boots on pavement, vehicle engines, radio chatter. The convoy stopped in front of our house. "Looks abandoned," a voice said outside. "Check the doors." I heard them testing the barricaded front door, walking around the perimeter, noting the boarded windows. Place is sealed up tight, either empty or someone's holed up inside. Thermal shows no heat signatures on the first floor. Basement. Can't get a reading. Too much interference from the furnace. Long pause. I held Talia against me, both of us barely breathing. Orders are to clear every structure. Sir, we're behind schedule. 3 more blocks to cover before dark. Another pause. I could hear them discussing something in low voices. Market is cleared. If anyone's alive in there, they'll come out eventually. We'll get them on the next sweep. The convoy moved on. Talia was shaking against me. They were going to kill us. They were following orders to contain the infection. Can't blame them for doing their job. Their job is to protect people. Their job is to protect the people who are left. And right now, that means making sure this thing doesn't spread any further. We sat in the dark basement, listening to gunshots from other houses, engines moving further away, the gradual return of silence. Dad, what happens when our food runs out? I looked at my daughter in the dim light from our emergency lantern. She was getting thinner, paler. The stress was wearing on her, and I could see the infection starting to return to her injured leg. We figure something out, but I was running out of things to figure out. The military cleanup meant there would be no rescue, no return to normal, no waiting for the authorities to solve this. We were on our own, in a world that had decided we were probably better off dead. Get some sleep, I said. Tomorrow we start planning for the long term. But I wasn't sure there was going to be a long term for people like us. The infected were getting more active, more coordinated. The military was eliminating survivors as efficiently as infected, and our supplies were running down to nothing. For the first time since this started, I began to wonder if fighting to stay alive was the right choice, or if we were just prolonging the inevitable. On day 7, we heard a car engine. I'd been changing Talia's bandages. Her leg was getting infected again without proper medical supplies, when the sound of a working vehicle cut through the constant background noise of distant screaming and breaking glass. Dad, that's a car. I climbed up to peek through the boards over the kitchen window. A police cruiser was moving slowly down Main Street, dodging abandoned vehicles and bodies. The driver was wearing a hazmat mask, and there was someone else in the passenger seat. Thank God, Talia breathed from the basement stairs. It's the police. But I'd lived long enough to know that uniforms don't make people trustworthy, especially when the world's ending. I watched the cruiser stop in front of various houses, saw 2 figures in hazmat gear get out and go inside. They were carrying military-style rifles and had what looked like medical equipment. After they'd been inside the Henderson place for about 10 minutes, I heard gunshots. When they came out, they were dragging something that had been a person. It was still moving, still trying to bite them through the hazmat suits, but it was definitely dead. They loaded it into the cruiser's trunk like it was luggage. Dad, are they helping people or? I don't know. And that was the problem. In a crisis, you can't afford to guess wrong about people's intentions. The cruiser started moving again, stopping at each house with any signs of habitation. Same routine, go in, shots fired sometimes, drag out infected sometimes. They seemed to be collecting specimens, or clearing out remaining infected, or both. I watched them work for over an hour. They were systematic, professional, and completely focused on their mission. Whatever that mission was. When they reached the Frost place, they spent longer inside. When they came out, they had 2 bodies, Mira and what must have been her son who'd been visiting from college. Both were still moving, hands zip-tied behind their backs. They loaded both bodies into the cruiser and continued down the street. The cruiser stopped in front of our house. Stay quiet, I whispered to Talia, grabbing the rifle. Whatever happens, don't make a sound. I heard boots on the front porch, muffled voices discussing whether the house looked occupied. They tried the front door, found it barricaded. One of them walked around the outside, checking windows, testing the boards I'd nailed up. Basement windows been reinforced from inside, a muffled voice said through the hazmat mask. So someone's alive in there. Could be infected, hiding until they turn completely. Or could be survivors. They stood in our yard for what felt like forever, having a discussion I couldn't quite hear. Finally, one of them called out, "Anyone alive in there, you need to come out. We're from the CDC. We're evacuating survivors to a secure medical facility." CDC, Centers for Disease Control. That should have been good news. "We can see your barricades. We know you're in there. You've got 30 seconds to respond, then we're coming in anyway." I looked down at Talia, who was watching me with wide, frightened eyes. She needed proper medical care. The infection in her leg was getting worse every day. These people had medical equipment, transportation, and legitimate government authority. They also had assault rifles and were collecting infected specimens for unknown purposes. "Dad, maybe we should." 20 seconds. I'd raised 2 children, worked 40 years, survived cancer. I'd made a lot of hard decisions in my life, but I'd never had to decide whether to trust armed strangers when my daughter's life hung in the balance, and when being wrong meant both of us dying. Dad, I need help. My leg is getting worse. If these are really CDC people, the infection in her leg was spreading. Without antibiotics, it would eventually kill her. These people might be legitimate medical personnel trying to help survivors, or they might be something much worse. 10 seconds. The infected were mindless, predictable. These people were thinking, planning, armed, and had their own agenda. In a world gone mad, I wasn't sure which was more dangerous. 5 seconds. I made my choice. I climbed the basement stairs with my hands visible and empty, leaving the rifle behind. When they broke down the door, I was waiting in the kitchen. Don't shoot, I said. I've got my injured daughter downstairs. We're not infected. 2 figures in full hazmat gear pointed assault rifles at my chest. Through their face shields, I could see they were professionals, calm, alert, experienced with this kind of situation. Step back against the wall. The one who seemed to be in charge said. His voice was muffled but professional. How long have you been hiding here? 7 days. Since the emergency alert. Anyone else in the house? Just my daughter. She was hurt in a car accident last year, has trouble walking. The wound's getting infected. The second person, a woman, based on her voice and build, stepped forward with what looked like medical equipment. We need to examine both of you for infection signs. Standard CDC protocol. Standard protocol. That was either very good news or very bad news. What kind of medical facility are we talking about? I asked. Military supervised quarantine and research facility. Medical care, food security, and full CDC standard decontamination protocols. But we need to move fast. This entire area is scheduled for aerial sterilization tomorrow morning. Sterilization. Another one of those words that meant exactly what it sounded like. Dad. Talia's voice drifted up from the basement. Is everything okay up there? Bring her up, the woman said. We need to examine both of you before we can authorize transport. I went down and helped Talia climb the stairs. She was pale, sweating from fever, but she managed a weak smile when she saw the official-looking people. Thank God you found us, she said. I was starting to think nobody was coming. The woman examined Talia first, shined a light in her eyes, checked her temperature with an infrared thermometer, looked at the infected wound on her leg. She took samples of blood and saliva, ran them through some kind of portable testing device. She did the same for me. Quick, professional, thorough. Both negative for active viral markers, she announced after about 10 minutes. Clean. The team leader lowered his rifle slightly. Good. We've got transport space for 2 more. But we leave immediately, no time to pack anything. What about other survivors in town? You're our last stop. We've been working this area for 3 days. Everyone else was either already evacuated or... He gestured toward the bodies visible through our window. I looked at my daughter, who was leaning against the wall, exhausted from the climb upstairs and weak from infection. She needed medical care I couldn't provide. The wound on her leg would kill her if it got much worse, and I had no way to treat it properly. But something about this whole situation felt wrong. Too organized, too efficient. In my experience, real rescue operations were chaotic, desperate affairs with overwhelmed personnel making decisions on the fly. This felt more like harvesting. Can I bring my rifle? I asked. The team leader hesitated. Personal weapons aren't permitted in the quarantine facility. Security protocol. Why not? Too many traumatized people with guns creates more security problems than external threats. All security is handled by trained military personnel. I'd never been in a genuinely safe place where they took away your ability to defend yourself. That was the first rule of survival. Never give up your weapons unless you were absolutely certain you didn't need them. But Talia was dying, and these people had medical supplies, transportation, official authority, and what appeared to be a legitimate government operation. Dad, we have to go with them. Talia's voice was getting weaker. I can't. I need real medical help. I looked at my daughter, who'd trusted me to keep her alive for 7 days in hell. Now she was asking me to trust strangers with both our lives. In the distance, I could hear more vehicles approaching. Engine sounds, radio chatter, the coordinated movement of what sounded like a much larger operation. How many people are at this facility? I asked. Currently housing about 200 survivors from the surrounding region. Full medical staff, research personnel working on treatment options, military security. 200 survivors. That was more than I'd dared to hope still existed. Dad, please. I'm scared and I'm getting sicker. These people can help us. The woman stepped forward. Mr. Holt, I can see you're concerned about your daughter's welfare. That's exactly why we need to get her to the facility. She needs 4 antibiotics, proper wound care, and monitoring for secondary infections. We can provide all of that. Everything they were saying made sense. Everything they were offering was exactly what we needed. But 40 years of construction work had taught me that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. We need a decision now, the team leader said. Transport leaves in 5 minutes, and we won't be back this way. I made another choice. Okay, we'll come with you. The ride to the facility took about 40 minutes through countryside that looked like a war zone. Burned-out farms, abandoned military checkpoints, dead bodies in various stages of decay scattered along the roadside. But there were also signs of organization, cleaned-up areas, functioning infrastructure, supply convoys moving in coordinated patterns. Whatever authority was running this operation, they had significant resources and planning capabilities. How long has the facility been operating? I asked. About 2 weeks, the woman answered. Her name was Dr. Sarah Martinez, and she seemed genuinely concerned about Talia's condition. We started moving survivors there as soon as we could establish a secure perimeter and decontamination protocols. The facility itself was impressive, a converted state university surrounded by multiple layers of fencing, guard towers, and what looked like military-grade security systems. Clean, organized, and bustling with official-looking people in hazmat suits. They processed us through decontamination, full chemical wash, medical examination, psychological evaluation, assignment of identification numbers, and housing assignments. Talia got immediate medical attention. For antibiotics, proper wound cleaning, pain medication, and a clean bed in what used to be a dormitory room. Within hours, she was looking better than she had in a week. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I spent my time watching the facility's operations, learning the routines, asking careful questions about how long we'd be staying. The answers were always professional and vague. Until the regional situation stabilizes, until we receive updated CDC guidance, until comprehensive testing is complete. The facility was divided into different sections. Family units got housing in the converted dormitories. Single adults were housed in the gymnasium. Medical cases went to the old science buildings. Research personnel and security had their own areas. People who'd been there longest seemed relaxed, well-fed, grateful. But I noticed they all wore identification bands that tracked their movements, and certain areas were off-limits without escort. Dad, look around, Talia said on our 3rd day. She was walking without pain for the first time in months, her leg finally healing properly. We have food, medical care, safety, other people to talk to. After what we've been through, why can't you just be grateful? She was right about the conditions. 3 meals a day, clean clothes, working showers, comfortable beds. Compared to our week in the basement, this was paradise. But I'd lived long enough to know that paradise always has a price, and someone always has to pay it. On the 4th day, I started paying attention to the research activities. The science buildings were heavily guarded, but I could see through some of the windows during my supervised walks around the facility. Laboratory equipment, medical personnel in full containment suits, and what looked like human subjects in various stages of something. What kind of research are they doing here? I asked Dr. Martinez during one of Talia's medical checkups. Developing treatments and vaccines for the viral infection. Understanding transmission mechanisms. Standard CDC infectious disease protocols. Are they using volunteers from the survivor population? Long pause. All research activities follow strict ethical guidelines and informed consent procedures. That wasn't a no. That night, I started asking questions of other survivors. Casual conversations about how long they'd been there, whether they'd volunteered for any research programs, if they'd seen people leave for other facilities. The answers were interesting. People had been arriving steadily for 2 weeks, but nobody seemed to know anyone who'd left. The research program was described as voluntary, but several people mentioned being selected based on their medical profiles or demographic characteristics. And there was something else. The longer-term residents seemed different. Still friendly, still grateful to be alive, but there was something in their eyes that reminded me of the infected back in town. Not the mindless hunger, but a kind of emptiness. Dad, you're being paranoid again, Talia said when I mentioned my concerns. Dr. Martinez says my leg is healing perfectly, and they're talking about moving me to the long-term housing section next week. That means they expect us to be here for a while, building a life. What if I don't want to build a life here? Then where else would we go? The whole world is infected. This is probably the safest place left. She was right, of course. Even if I had concerns about the facility's research activities, the alternative was going back to a world full of infected people and dwindling supplies. But that night, I heard screaming from the direction of the research buildings. Not the mindless screaming of infected people, but human screaming. Terrified, desperate, quickly silenced. On the 5th day, they called my name for comprehensive medical evaluation and research program assessment. I was 62 years old with a history of cancer, heart problems, and chronic back pain. In a world where medical resources were precious and population survival was critical, I wasn't exactly a priority case. Unless they needed test subjects. It's routine evaluation for all long-term residents, Dr. Martinez assured me. Health screening, psychological assessment, skills evaluation for community work assignments. What happens to people who aren't suitable for long-term residence? We have transfer agreements with other facilities better equipped for specialized care needs. Transfer agreements. Another way of saying some people disappeared and never came back. I looked at Talia, who was laughing with other survivors in the common area, healthier and happier than she'd been since her accident. She'd made friends, found purpose helping with the facility's administrative work, and was talking about the future like we actually had one. For the first time in years, she was thriving. Mr. Holt? Dr. Martinez was waiting for my decision. The evaluation appointment is scheduled for this afternoon. I thought about the choice I'd made in our kitchen back home. I thought about the week we'd spent hiding, the days we'd spent here, the life my daughter could have in this new world. I thought about the screaming I'd heard from the research buildings, and what happened to people who weren't suitable for long-term residence. Of course, I said. I'm ready whenever you are. The evaluation facility was in the basement of what used to be the chemistry building. Clean, well-lit, professional. But I could smell disinfectant and something else. Something that reminded me of the morgue where I'd identified my wife's body 20 years ago. Dr. Martinez led me through a series of rooms with increasingly sophisticated medical equipment. Blood work, brain scans, physical endurance tests, psychological evaluations. You're in remarkably good health for someone your age with your medical history, she said, reviewing my test results. The cancer markers are completely clear, cardiovascular function is within normal ranges, and your psychological profile shows exceptional stress resilience. Is that good or bad? It means you're a valuable community member with potential for long-term survival and contribution. She led me to a final room where several other medical personnel were waiting with clipboards and monitoring equipment. Mr. Holt, we'd like to offer you the opportunity to participate in our advanced research program. Your medical profile makes you an ideal candidate for some very promising experimental treatments. What kind of treatments? We're developing enhanced immunity protocols that could provide protection against current and future viral mutations. The treatment process involves controlled exposure to modified viral samples under carefully monitored conditions. Controlled exposure. They wanted to infect me deliberately. What's the success rate? We're seeing very encouraging results. About 60% of subjects develop full immunity within the first treatment cycle. And the other 40%? Long pause. Experience various degrees of adverse reaction. But even unsuccessful treatments provide valuable data for refining the process. I looked around the room at the medical equipment, the restraints built into the examination table, the observation windows that would let researchers watch what happened to subjects during treatment. What happens if I decline to participate? That's certainly you're right. We would process you for transfer to a facility better equipped for long-term care of non-contributing residents. Transfer to a facility that didn't exist. I'd been around long enough to recognize a euphemism when I heard one. And my daughter? Miss Holt has been approved for permanent residence here. Her administrative skills and positive attitude make her a valuable community member. She'll be well cared for. They were separating us. Talia would stay, contributing to their community, living safely behind their fences. I would disappear into their research program or their fictional transfer facility. Can I have some time to think about it? Of course, but we'll need your decision by tomorrow morning. The research program has a limited number of slots, and we have other candidates waiting. I spent that evening walking around the facility, looking at everything with new eyes. The happy survivors, the efficient operations, the careful security that kept people in as much as it kept threats out. It was a good place for people who could contribute, who could adapt, who could accept what they were told without asking too many questions. People like my daughter, who'd found happiness here after years of struggle. It wasn't a good place for people like me, who'd lived too long and seen too much to trust institutional promises without examining the fine print. That night, I went to visit Talia in her dormitory room. She was reading a book, something she hadn't done in months back home, and looked more relaxed than I'd seen her since before her accident. "How was your evaluation?" she asked. "Thorough. They want me to participate in some kind of research program." "That's wonderful. Dr. Martinez says they're doing amazing work developing treatments. You could be part of something really important." I sat down on the edge of her bed and looked at my daughter, who trusted me to make the right choices for both of us, just like she had during our week in hell. "Talia, what if I said we needed to leave here?" She stared at me. "Leave? Dad, why would we leave? This place is perfect. I'm healthy, we're safe, we have a future here. What if it's not as perfect as it seems?" "What do you mean?" I thought about how to explain my concerns without destroying her newfound happiness. She'd been through so much: the accident, years of pain and limitation, the terror of the outbreak, the desperation of our basement hideout. She deserved this peace, this security, this chance at a normal life. "Dad, you saved my life. You kept me alive when the whole world was ending. But we're not in survival mode anymore. We can build something here, contribute to something bigger than just staying alive. And if the price of that is higher than we know." "What price?" "They're feeding us, housing us, providing medical care. What more could we ask for?" I looked at my daughter, who'd found hope again in this place, who was talking about the future like we actually had won. She was right about everything. This was better than anything we could have hoped for when we were hiding in our basement. But I'd lived long enough to know that everything good comes with a price, and that institutions always collect their debts eventually. "Nothing, sweetheart. You're right. This is a good place. So you'll participate in the research program?" I kissed her forehead like I had when she was little and afraid of the dark. "I'll do what's best for our family." The next morning, I reported to Dr. Martinez's office as scheduled. "Have you decided about the research program, Mr. Holt?" "I have. I'd like to participate." "Excellent. We can begin the preparation process immediately. I have one condition." She looked up from her paperwork. "What's that?" "I want to write a letter to my daughter, to be delivered to her after the treatment is complete, regardless of the outcome." "That's unusual, but I suppose we can accommodate that request." I spent the next hour writing the most important letter of my life. I told Talia about the choices I'd made to keep her alive, about the world we'd lost and the world she could help build. I told her I was proud of the woman she'd become, and that whatever happened next, she should remember that someone loved her enough to make the hard choices. I told her to be happy, to be safe, and to never stop asking questions when something felt wrong. I sealed the letter and handed it to Dr. Martinez. "She'll receive this after the treatment cycle is complete. Regardless of outcome?" "Regardless of outcome." They prepared me for the experimental treatment with the same professional efficiency they'd shown throughout my stay. Clean medical gown, sterile preparation room, monitoring equipment attached to track my vital signs. "Mr. Holt, you should know that your decision to participate is genuinely appreciated. The data we collect from subjects like yourself could save thousands of lives. Subjects like myself, people too old or too suspicious to be ideal community members, but healthy enough to provide useful research data. Will I see my daughter again? That will depend on how you respond to the treatment." They wheeled me into the treatment room, where I could see other subjects in various stages of the experimental process. Some looked normal, alert, healthy. Others looked like they were dying. A few looked like they were already dead, but hadn't stopped moving yet. "Mr. Holt, we're going to begin now. Try to relax." I thought about Talia, safe in her dormitory room, working on her administrative tasks, making friends, planning for a future. I thought about the letter I'd written, and the choices that had brought us both to this place. Some choices you make for yourself. Others you make for the people you love. The injection burned going in, like liquid fire spreading through my veins. Within seconds, I could feel something changing in my body, something fundamental shifting at the cellular level. Through the observation window, I could see Dr. Martinez making notes on her clipboard, recording my reactions with the same professional detachment she'd shown throughout our interactions. I'd lived through a lot in 62 years, I'd survived construction accidents, cancer, heart disease, the end of the world, and a week in hell with my daughter. I'd kept her alive through all of it. Now she was safe, fed, cared for, and surrounded by people who would make sure she stayed that way. She had a future in whatever world came after this one. The burning sensation was spreading through my chest, making it hard to breathe. My heart was racing, then slowing, then racing again in patterns that didn't feel entirely human anymore. But I could see Talia's face in my memory, laughing with her new friends, reading her book, talking about tomorrow like it was something worth looking forward to. That was worth any price they wanted to collect. The monitors around me were beeping faster now, showing vital signs that were climbing beyond normal human ranges. Dr. Martinez was talking into her radio, calling for additional medical support. But I wasn't really listening anymore. I was thinking about a Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago, when the emergency alert came through while I was making my daughter's breakfast. I'd kept her alive through the end of the world. Everything else was just details. The beeping stopped. Talia received the letter 3 days later, along with the news that her father had volunteered for advanced medical research and died peacefully during treatment. Dr. Martinez delivered both personally, with genuine sympathy and professional condolences. The letter explained everything: the choices he'd made, the suspicions he'd harbored, the price he'd paid to ensure her survival and future. He'd known what the research program really was, and he'd chosen it anyway. She cried for 2 days, then folded the letter carefully and put it away in her desk drawer. 6 months later, when the facility's research program produced a working vaccine against the viral infection, Talia was among the first to receive it. She lived comfortably and safely for the rest of her life, contributing to the reconstruction of civilization, never knowing that the vaccine was developed using data collected from her father and 43 other voluntary subjects. She never stopped asking questions when something felt wrong, but she learned, as her father had learned decades earlier, that sometimes the right choice and the good choice aren't the same thing. Sometimes survival requires sacrifices that can't be measured in simple moral arithmetic. Sometimes love means making sure the people you care about never have to know what you gave up to keep them safe. In the new world that grew from the ashes of the old one, that was enough.